Which was commemorated in the United States on the 12th of April. We have Stella Bengal, who's a very impressive woman who's from Austria, born in Austria and survived the Holocaust, and she'll be speaking. And Ambassador Hannah Rosenthal, who's followed our distinguished guest today, who now works for the Obama administration. She's the special envoy for the State Department on monitoring and combating anti-Semitism. She'll be speaking, and her title of her talk after Mrs. Bengal speaks will be "What Did We Learn?" So it'll be a special event on noon on the 12th of April, and something definitely connected to this situation or issue. We have a speaker tomorrow who I really recommend that you come to hear her speak. Her name is Bertha Kayetsi. She's originally from Rwanda, and she's a fascinating person. She'll speak about this, but much of her family was wiped out in the genocide of Rwanda, and she actually raised several of her siblings from the age of 12 years old by herself, and managed to do so. And she somehow managed to go on. She's doing a PhD in Canada in the University of Ottawa on genocide studies, and is now working on her third novel and personal autobiography as well. So she's an amazing person. She'll be here tomorrow, and I urge you to come to her speak. And today we have an important presentation by Gregg Rickman. Dr. Rickman will be speaking on the Jews of Yemen, the last exodus. And as many of you know, Gregg was the first special envoy to monitor and combat anti-Semitism. It was a position that was created within the State Department under the Bush administration, and Gregg was the first person to fill this very important position. He's actually a visiting fellow at ISGAP. His paperwork went through after about a year. So congratulations, Lauren and Gregg. So we're very honored that he's here, and he is a fellow of ISGAP. In 2006 to 2009, he was a special envoy. In 2003 to 2006, he was the staff director of the subcommittee on the oversights and investigation in the House International Relations Committee. In 2002 to 2003, he was the director of congressional affairs for the Republican Jewish Coalition. He was the vice president of the Nicholas Denzenhall Communications Management firm before he joined the government. He received a PhD in international relations from the University of Miami, and he did his first 2 degrees at John Carroll University. He's the author of many books and articles, and including some very important books such as a book entitled Conquest and Redemption, A History of Jewish Assets from the Holocaust. Gregg was very much instrumental in uncovering and working with Stu Eisenstadt on Swiss banks and funds that were hidden during the Holocaust, and the U.S. government put pressure on the Swiss and other governments to divulge and to show documentation of hidden money from survivors of the Holocaust. And Gregg Rickman was, among other things, very much at the forefront of a successful movement to uncover untraceable, to this point, funds that were hidden from the Holocaust. He's widely written and is published in the New York Times, Vanity Fair, the JTA, the Jerusalem Post, the Aretz. He's been interviewed at the BBC, on the Panorama program, for example. He's been on television and media throughout the world. So it's really an honor to have you here. And today he's going to be speaking about his very special experience in Yemen while he was with the government.
I hope I live up to that wonderful introduction. In November 2007, Ninwa al-Nayedi, a young Yemenite Jewish woman, was forcibly converted to Islam in Yemen and forced to marry a Muslim from a nearby neighborhood. Ninwa came from the oldest Jewish community in the world. It was a community unaccustomed to the more modern ways of the world, yet it is a very vital part of the Jewish world. On October 31st, 2009, the Wall Street Journal published an article on this effort, what happened with the Jews of Yemen. And they described Yemen and its Jews this way. Many can recite passages of the Torah by heart and read Hebrew, but can't read their native tongue of Arabic. They live in stone houses, often without running water or electricity. One Yemeni woman showed up at the airport when they were going to be leaving, expecting to board her flight with a live chicken. When you hear this, it helps you to understand the context in which Yemeni Jews live and their way of life. As the historian Bat Yeor wrote of Yemen's Jews in the book Islam and Dimitude, quote, "The Jews were protected by the Sultan or by tribes until the mid-20th century. So lowly was their status under the law that it was as shameful to kill one of them as it was to kill a Muslim woman. If a Jew protected by a tribe was killed, this tribe retaliated by killing a Jew from the guilty tribe. The result was 2 Jews murdered with no inconvenience to any Muslim." Now, it's also important to know that in 1922, the government of Yemen reintroduced an ancient Islamic law, the Orphans Decree, requiring that fatherless Jewish children be forcibly converted to Islam. Resistance to such practices was punished by beatings and imprisonment. This law, as well as one requiring them to wear different clothing than Muslims, was enforced until 1949, when the Jews left for Israel. Here we see an historic dedication to discrimination and forced conversions. It is believed that since 2001, at least 300 Yemenite Jews have been forced to convert to Islam. Remember this fact. Remember what I talk when I say that they're about the conversions. This will keep coming up. In 1947, with the UN partition vote, Muslim writers presented Jews in Aden with the choice to convert or emigrate. And they were joined by the local police force, which launched a pogrom that killed 82 Jews and plundered and destroyed hundreds of Jewish homes. Early in 1948, the false accusation of the ritual murder of 2 girls led to further looting. This increasingly perilous situation led to the immigration of virtually the entire Yemenite Jewish community, almost 50,000, between June 1949 and September 1950 in Operation Magic Carpet to Israel. A smaller continuous migration was allowed to continue into 1962, when the Civil War put an abrupt halt to any further Jewish exodus until the 1990s, following reunification of the North and the South. There have also been internal migrations due to anti-Semitic actions forcing Jews to flee from one town to another within Yemen. Now, let's get back to Ninwa. Ninwa had been studying at the yeshiva in New York City, and she'd been hosted while there, and she established a very real and true emotional attachment to her family. And upon hearing this, they needed help. And they came to me through the Orthodox Jewish community in New York seeking help for her. Now, as the special envoy to monitor and combat anti-Semitism, it was my obligation to help her. My office had a global responsibility to Jews anywhere that were in distress, especially those victimized by anti-Semitism. Now, I needed to discover more about this incident, whether it was isolated or it was part of a larger pattern of harassment and anti-Semitism in Yemen. So in December of 2007, I traveled to Sana'a, Yemen's capital, to examine the situation. What I discovered there was a country beset with strife, led by an Islamic fundamentalist rebellion in the north, launched by the Al-Houthi Shiite rebel faction, who had nailed a note to the door of a Jewish family in Sana'a, which is a city in the north, in February of 2007. Like in Aden 60 years before, threatening them with expulsion or conversion if they didn't leave within days. We had helped this community back then in February, arranging for prayer books and a Torah to be sent to them because they left almost in the middle of the night with nothing but their clothes on their back. Now, this story, followed by Ninwa's case, seemed to be only further evidence of a growing problem facing the Jews of Yemen. I also found the government not fully in control of its own territory because of its ancient tribal structure and respected boundaries. When I asked to visit the main Jewish community in the northern town of Reda, I was told that the government could not guarantee my safety there, and therefore, even with government troops, I could not travel that far into the country, lacking the tribal permission of the sheikh to cross internal borders. Eventually, I did gain permission to travel to the provincial capital of Amran province, accompanied by government troops riding in a machine gun mounted jeep. Now, what does this situation say for a country that has to negotiate the rights for its troops to cross its own internal borders. It's not a good situation, and it shows that they're not in control of the country, which is why we have problems today. What is clear is that the al-Houthi rebels who threaten the Jews are supported by Iran, and they join their fellow al-Qaeda terrorists who spread their terror throughout Yemen and across the oceans to the United States, as they did over Christmas time, as the al-Qaeda terrorists did last year in Detroit. Together, they pose a clear threat to Yemen and to its remaining Jews. This is a very real problem for a government that's not, again, in control of all its territory. Most importantly, as Charles has tried to portray through this institute, this situation demonstrates clearly that history repeats itself. Throughout history, Jews have been proven to be the canaries in the coal mine. What starts with Jews rarely ends with them. And once again, the world is faced with a threat from a force that features in its reign of terror a campaign targeting Jews, and then they spread their venom to hatred of others. Now, on my drive to the north, I was struck by the vastly undeveloped, primitive nature of the country. I saw field upon field of khat, K-H-A-T. It's a native-grown stimulant and hallucinogenic drug that is chewed in a wad in their mouth, and they suck the juices out of it, and that's what makes them high, basically. The fields proliferate in Yemen and are guarded by young men with guns holed up in small towers in the fields that consume much of Yemen's diminishing water supply, up to about 40%. Clearly, they care more about doping up their country than they do about bettering it. When I arrived in Amran province, I was greeted by several dozen armed men waiting to escort me up to the provincial governor's office, all of them staring at me as if I had been beamed down from Mars. The scene reminded me of those I used to see on television of the PLO gunmen surrounding Yasser Arafat's command centers in Beirut. It was surrealistic. My escorts, as they were, lined the staircase going up to the second floor of the governor's office. The situation was uniquely bizarre and, again, surrealistic. I realized that I certainly wasn't in Cleveland, Ohio, my birthplace, anymore. The governor greeted me, and he was firm and he was imposing, and he offered me tea and assured me that his Jews were safe in Yemen, and that despite what I had heard, Ninwa had chosen to marry the man of her dreams, and that there should be no worries. His people, he said, assured him that he had verified this. He did not complain, but he did complain about one thing, that the Jews in Yemen had been receiving money from the United States in aid because they're so poor. But as long as they remained good Yemenite citizens, meaning not offering support for Israel, all would be well for them. Now, upon my return to Sana'a, I met with the now displaced Jewish community from that northern town of Sada, and they were living in government housing, and that is to the credit of the Yemeni government, I have to say that. But it was something that our ambassador and myself, I had pushed urgently following that initial disturbance in February of 07. What I heard from these people were stories of harassment, and again, multiple stories of forced conversions of boys and girls and forced marriages. I heard about intimidation, rock throwing, name calling, fears that their homes would be looted if they left them for any amount of time. Sort of a surveillance system of little kids running around telling on them to the government if they were to be seen going to the American embassy or to be seen going anywhere that was viewed as being inappropriate. I heard about inequality for Jews in the court system of Yemen. For example, the ancient inability of non-Muslims to testify against Muslims in a court or to serve in the government. These people were very scared, and they told us so. Finally, I was given a list of some 200 names of people who would leave if they could come to the United States as refugees. At this point, I knew something had to be done. The conditions they were living in, the security situation I saw, the fields of cots, the security or lack thereof told me that their time was running out. When I conveyed these concerns to the Yemenite government and their officials, they expressed an understanding, and they assured me that they would do all that they could to protect, again, their Jews. Yet when I complained about allegations of forced conversions and marriages. And I was told very simply by very senior members of the government that, quote, Muslims don't mind conversions. That statement told me that they took the threats not quite as seriously as I hoped they would, and that was all I needed to hear. When I went back to Washington, I reported on my trip to the people, to my seniors at the State Department, as well as the National Security Council, and I told them something had to be done. These people needed to leave, and we needed to get them out of there as soon as possible. We worked with the embassy staff in Yemen. The ambassador was wonderful, Ambassador Sesh. They agreed with me. They agreed, they were with me on these trips, on these talks. They had seen every day what the situation was like, and together we began a process that would create a visa class for them. That's already in law, but create a class for them that they would qualify for, that they could come out as a persecuted religious minority. As the Wall Street Journal article explained, the events of the summer of 2008, bombing attacks against the U.S. Embassy, they launched mortars against the embassy gates, closed the embassy for about a week, and then several months later, there were mortars fired at the housing complex where U.S. Embassy officials and their families live. Now that's important to know because it's not just some random building. These people had to have been followed to where they live for these gunmen, for these terrorists, to shoot at them, to know the target. And then finally on December 11th, 2008, there was a killing of a Yemenite Jew in a market in Raqqa by a gunman who had previously killed his wife, was in jail for a while and allowed out. And I want to stress what's important about this killing, beyond the fact that he was unfortunately killed, was that the gunman demanded, before he killed him, to motion in a hurry, that he either convert or die. And then he pumped about 5 or 6 bullets into him and killed him right on the spot. The embassy plan was put into action, and by summer of 2009, following my departure from the State Department, some 60 Yemenite Jews had traveled to New York City, under a refugee class provided with aid from the government and training and housing. And an untold number more, perhaps in double digits, into Israel. So it's, give or take, there's about 100 that made it out. So about 200, maybe a little bit less, remain. And it's my hope that they will be able to leave soon. To sum it up, it's very simple. Yemen is not a safe place for the Jews there. The longer they remain, the more insecure I believe that they will be. But for a variety of reasons, they remain in Yemen, clinging to a measure of familiarity. They are ancient, they've been there for several thousand years as a group. Clinging to tradition, hoping against hope that they will not fall prey to the strife that afflicts Yemen, and what we've now seen in the news is spreading. I hope that they will one day soon be able to join their brethren outside of Yemen, where they will be safe from intimidation and attacks like they faced in their ancient homeland. Thank you, and I'd love to take your questions because there's so much more that can probably be brought out from this story.
Thank you very much, Greg. Just before the questions go, I just want to say that also I had the honor to hear, Greg, over your career in Europe and in Canada at the moment, and this is another example of how you've served the position, really well. So
Thank you.
You've done amazing stuff. So,
Okay. I don't know too much about Yemen. I'm not sure. Can you tell us? Is it a Shiite? Is it a Sunni? I mean, obviously, it's in the middle of basically a civil war. Is there oil there? And
There's a little bit of oil.
okay.
There's a little bit of oil. The problem is that Yemen is, imagine the Arabian Peninsula. They're at the southern tip. They're close to Somalia, across from the Red Sea, which has its problems there because it's a pirate haven. There are a lot of Somalis in Yemen, and with that sort of immigration and an open sea and lack of control of borders, you don't know who's coming in. Terrorists, weapons, money, God only knows. The Al-Houthis are a particular problem because they are Shiite. Government is Sunni. The Shiites in the north are, they launch, every time it warms up in the spring, they launch a rebellion. But this rebellion has been getting worse over the years. And they had the temerity over, I think last fall, to cross what is a very disputed border with the Saudis. And they grabbed a couple of guys on patrol. I think they killed one of them, and they wouldn't let them go, the one that they grabbed, and so the Saudis went after them with their Air Force. And it was a rather pitched battle for a while, for a couple of weeks. Saudis, of course, prevailed, but the important thing is to know is that they're supported by Iran, and the Iranians are opposing the Saudis in a lot of places in the Middle East and beyond. And that pitched battle was an example of a dispute we might hear more about later as things develop. Yes.
Is there any communication between the Jews who have emigrated out of Yemen and those who remain that you know of?
Oh yeah. Yes, very much so.
So could you elaborate then on your thinking about why the 200 or a major part of the 200 that remain don't want to leave?
I think that they don't want to leave. That some of them, I think a lot of them would leave if the ideal situation for them would be they could leave quickly, not be found to have been, by the kids that they pay, a couple pennies per day to go tattle on them, and that they could get paid back for the property. Now, some of you may think I described them as living in stone houses. They do value these houses. This is what, and their possessions. Right before the process was created for them to act, right before it actually began for them to leave, the president of Yemen offered them about $10,000 for their homes to move down to Sana'a. And they took this very seriously. $10,000 is a lot in a general sense, but it's a lot, much more to them. And they wanted compensation for their homes and their belongings. One rabbi, for example, that was there that I met with had a collection of ancient texts. God only knows how old they were and what was there, that was looted when he had been out of the house for a while. And he filed a very serious and large claim against the tribes who control the area for that material. It's probably put out on the antiques market. Probably didn't have any idea what they took. As to why they don't want to leave, they're scared. They want money back for their homes and their possessions. They're afraid of being seen by these little spies and stoned and killed. It's a great atmosphere of intimidation that they live through. And finally, I think that they don't know anything else. They don't know another way of living. That this is the place that they've always been, that their families have been through, and I think that they probably in some way figure, we lived through it before, we'll continue to live through it, this is just a bump in the road, things will get better. But their viability as a community starts to diminish when you start to drop below certain numbers. I would argue that it's not so, they weren't so viable even when they were higher. But as they come down, and maybe even less than 200, I don't have a real fix on the full number. But I think that they make a mistake, as a lot of other immigrant classes have made in torturous times, that they feel that it'll blow over. I don't think this one's going to blow over. I think
The devil you know, but when they were offered the money to relocate within the country, was it going to be to some sort of ghetto situation?
Where they're staying, and where some of the Jews from Sada are staying, is government housing. I've seen it. It's not the Ritz-Carlton, but it's not a mud house either. Is it safe? I don't think so, because there's one guy, maybe with a pistol out in front, who either could get paid $20 to go get a cup of coffee, and then somebody goes in and does what they need to do, or they go through. I don't know. The government continually made references to me rather obliquely to say, how long do you expect us to care for these people? Can't you go raise money in the community for them? So when we did find a way to get them out, then they had another problem. I think part of it is that it's not so much a ghetto, but it's a place that they believe, that the government believes that they can't continue to provide for them. Plus others in Yemen hold it against the government for saying, well, why do you continue to allow these people to live in there free of charge, plus a stipend? So things are going to come to a head with it. Will it be a ghetto? I don't know, but I don't know where they'll live.
How is the general situation in the country? Is there also support for the Jews, or in some, do they have, how is the neighborhood, I mean, the general atmosphere towards Jews in the country? Can you
Well,
tell
I
us
mean,
something about that?
I read you that statement from Bat Yor, who's written several good, amazing books on the idea of dimitude. The reason why I kept stressing conversion is because this is a place that strongly believes in the idea that Jews have their place, but as second-class citizens. And they're treated as second-class citizens. And that's why I also made the reference to their Jews. There's a bit of pride that they have a Jewish community that is there, that is allowed to survive, but under certain circumstances. As long as they don't go pro-Israel, they don't have demonstrations. As long as they don't do anything which rises above a certain line of acceptance. That line of acceptance being second-class status. So when they are moved down from Sada to Sana and put in government housing at government expense, to my knowledge, they're still there. That was February of 2007. We're moving on past 3 years already. This is not a wealthy government. I don't know how long they're going to stay there. I don't know how long they can afford to keep them there. And I don't know how long that the people in the country will say, will abide by the idea that you're putting these people up. There are only about 40, 50 people in there, but how can you put these people up at your government expense when we have to go pay for our own housing?
I was a little confused. You said they were offered $10,000.
For their homes.
Right. And which of these are the ones that are now in Sana?
No,
In
those
these
are the
government
ones
houses,
in
or they're still
Rada.
back in their
There's
homes?
Sada up in the north, they were
Yeah.
chased largely out of Rada, and then Sana'a,
Right.
which is the capital. Rada, they were offered money for the home. Some of them took, I'm not sure how many took them, if any, but it was kind of a ploy to keep them there. And you could also say it was a ploy to compensate them for the trouble that they're facing. It's like a double-sided coin.
Why was that up to keep them there? Would they have to leave
Because
the homes?
because there's a loss of face.
If they
The
can't?
government is not plotting to kill them. This is why I'm saying that the government is not controlling the full country. They're not plotting to kill them. They're not the best in the world for them, but they don't want them in a general sense to be liquidated. And they don't want them to leave because it's a loss of face saying that the country is unsecure, that they can't protect their own people. So if their people are chased out, if their Jews are chased out by their people, they lose face, they show that they can't control their own security, and they look bad. And looking bad is very bad for them in their own country and their own neighborhood.
So who offered the money?
The government.
They offered the money for them to stay there or to leave?
No, they offered, the Yemeni government offered $10,000 per household for Yemeni Jews to relocate out of Rada
Right.
down someplace else,
Right.
to keep them there. Because if we brought them out, they looked bad.
Okay. So, but they got their $10,000?
I can't tell you how
But
many.
then you said they're waiting for them, so I'm not.
No, that was a while ago. I can't tell you how many have gotten it or taken it. It was sort of a bribe to keep them there, but it was also a sign to say, of goodwill to say, see, we're taking care of you.
About 6 years ago, I met a group of Yemeni from Sada in an absorption center in Israel. Most of them were jewelers.
Yes.
I learned later that some of them went back to Sada.
Yeah.
Are there still any left there in that place?
I can't tell you how many are left. There probably are, there could possibly be a few. My understanding was when they moved them down, there were about 45 Jews. There were about 4 families. They quite possibly have all been out. Sada is not a safe place. Farther north is a very bad Al-Hudi area, and it's been under, for several years, been under attacks and a no-go area for the government. So my guess is they're not there.
Thank you.
What are their ages typically, and how do they sustain themselves?
Their ages run from newly born to generally older, but there are some young. I don't, you know, 20 less. But a lot of the kids, I think, out of the 60 that came to New York, I'm told that were about 25 are in a school now. So they're school age. And their profession is, as the gentleman mentioned, there are some jewelers, there are tradespeople. That's generally the kinds of things that they do. Yes, sir.
Just some information. We were in Aden for about 4 hours, which was about 3 hours to walk.
Yeah.
And the only Jewish presence at Aden is a very large Jewish cemetery right at the edge of town. You can't get into Yemen if you have an Israeli stamp on your passport. You need a passport without an entry stamp into Israel.
Right.
And cat is sold at every store in downtown Yemen. The tour guide asked us if we wanted to try it. I didn't mind going on a trip, but I was more afraid of my digestive system, so I turned it down. And as backward as they are, there's a Pizza Hut right in the middle of Aden.
Oh, I mean, I wasn't in Aden. I was in Sana'a and then Amran province, and then on the road between. This is not, you know, on the moon. I mean, there are Western companies operating. There's oil there. There are tech. There's a tech sector because of mobile phones. It's easier to go into a place like that and introduce mobile phones and try to do landlines with wires and all that. It is, however, you're right in commenting on cot. I mean, I went through the market in Sana'a, and everybody walks around with the little baggies, like the sandwich bags, full of these green leaves. You'd think it's marijuana if you didn't know better. But and I've seen them. The Yemeni Jews do it too. They sit and they wad. It's like chewing tobacco. They just sit and it stays in their mouth. And you know, I saw one guy in the market. His eyes rolled back into his head. They get high on it. That's what they do.
Is it a stimulant like cocaine and methamphetamine, or is it a...
Well, I'm not...
No, I'm just saying, but if you have a country where everyone is on...
They're all basically, not all, but I mean, they're all kind of buzzed out. They're just kind of buzzed out, and they, you know, what's fascinating is the amount of effort and the amount of money and security put to this crop. It's also in Somalia, so there's a bit of a trade there too. And some of it gets into Israel too because of the Yemenis.
Can I make a point? First of all, I never thought that I would hear that.
Bakat, but
I never thought that I'd hear Pizza Hut as a hallmark of cultural progression. And another point, you know, cotton is actually becoming extraordinarily popular in Israel.
Yeah, that's what I was saying.
It's widely available. Could you explain the influence? Why have things changed? So Jews were living under this sort of traditional Islamic notions of dimitude for a long time, for centuries, for generations. Why is the situation more precarious now, in your estimation?
Well,
what's going on to change the?
What's important in February of 2007, when that note was nailed up onto those families' door, was that it was nailed up by the son of the former tribal leader who had died. So this was a younger guy. The older generation, not that it was paradise, but had some understanding that, you know, you went along to get along, you did what you were supposed to, you didn't violate the tribal traditions and rules, and you did what you were supposed to remain a good Yemenite. Nothing went wrong. Well, this new kid, supposed to be in his 20s, I'm showing my age, didn't understand or appreciate these traditional rules, and he decided to, you know, he's the new guy in town, and he wants to make a mark on his rule, and he's tied up either directly or somehow with the Al-Houthis, and he kind of broke the tribal rules. And it's like, you know, somebody made a joke to me, you want to learn about life, go watch The Godfather. And it may take you as a surprise, but the rules of business, the rules of morals, things like that apply to these guys. This guy was trying to make his mark. He had to show himself, and he was the new Michael Corleone of Sada. Probably never thought you'd hear that mentioned in a USO lecture, but this is what these guys are. This is a kind of a gangsterism. It's a very countrywide idea of face. And so when you talk about why they would want the Jews to stay, why they wouldn't want them to leave, it's because this is all how they get along and how they operate.
Is there a geopolitical dimension, or this is just?
I think this is internal. It's all very tribal. It's one of the most tribal countries in the world. And as I said, I mean, I really wanted to go up to see the Jews of Breda. So it wasn't secure along the route. And the tribal leader said, we're not going to let government troops cross these tribal lines. Can you imagine? It would be like trying to go, I don't know, from, New York to Pennsylvania or something, and the governor says, you can't come to New York State. It just, and the government is not really in control beyond Sana'a. Yes, sir.
Could you comment on Yemen's relations with Saudi Arabia? I was a consultant in Riyadh in the 1980s, and 1 million Yemeni had all of the low-class jobs in Saudi Arabia. It was very easy to see them because they wore these costume type of clothes that were typical in their country. And I guess they were there because they represented a great source of money going back to their poor country.
Oh, yeah.
Does that still exist?
I can't tell you. I mean, I was in Saudi Arabia while I was at State, talking about anti-Semitism, but not in relation to Yemen. I can't recall if I saw a lot of Yemenis there.
They were a security threat too, by the way.
I know that there's a problem. There's a very big problem with Saudis and Yemenis on the border. They do look down on the Yemenites, the Saudis, and there's a whole border region that is in dispute, and that was the border region that the Houthis mixed it up with the Saudi Defense Forces.
Yeah, it's undefined. There's a dotted line there.
Fairly, it's undefined. Yes, yes. And that was the area in which they were shooting and bombing.
Can you discuss your nationality and your religion? I mean, did you hide from everybody that I'm from?
Well, I mean, I was there as a representative of the U.S. State Department. I mean, I had a title and I had cards and I had a diplomatic passport. I didn't tell them my religion or anything. Saudi, however you do have to tell them your religion. But I was not required to do that in Yemen. But they did know, obviously, I was a State Department special envoy. And it's interesting you mention that, because when I'm thinking about in Saudi and other places, it's amazing. It's amazing what people told me, knowing full well who I was. And I was telling Charles this, and the subject this story goes off the subject of Yemen, but I was in Saudi Arabia, and I met a professor, she was a PhD, very, very well educated, her flawless English, very well read, invited me into her home, sat down, and she asked me a question. She said, a friend of mine, I knew something was wrong right then and there. A friend of mine wanted to know, do Jews make their pastries with blood? I didn't, that was one of the most extreme comments I heard in my time as a special envoy. But I heard a lot of different things like that were crazy, that it just never entered their minds that they're saying, they don't know whether I'm Jewish, whether I'm Catholic, or whatever I am. But I am an American, and I am an official of the U.S. government at that time. And they said these things to me that were just breathtaking. So, yes, sir.
Are there any hopes for the Yemeni Jews? I mean, it sounds to me
What
like
sense?
a hopeless situation where eventually they will be either exterminated or converted into the Muslim.
I don't think they'll be exterminated. I don't think this is.
I'm getting that as
right.
one of the
I think that
options.
what they'll do is they'll die off. The older ones will die off. They'll know they just won't go because born there, died there, kind of thing. I think the younger ones might be converted or they'll leave. There's an immigrant community in London. They're in New York. There's some in Israel. I think they'll just over the generations disappear. The younger ones, I think they want to get out. The older ones want the very young to get out. I mean, if once you get below, once you get below 100, 200,
The numbers aren't there.
there's nothing, you can't support it. And in fact, a lot of the Jewish, international Jewish aid organizations, for right or wrong, will not support Jewish communities in countries, regardless of where they are, under a certain number. And that is clearly under a number. I mean, when we got them aid, I needed to appeal to them directly, saying, I don't care what your number is, they need X, Y, and Z, send them, this is the place, and they did it. But as a practice, a number like that starts to become unsustainable.
Is there a problem sending assistance?
You can get it in. I mean, it's not, it's not impossible. We got it in. We didn't, but they did. Takes a while. I mean, there's FedEx and things like that, but it doesn't happen, overnight.
Did they rescue that woman who was forced into the marriage?
No, she is, I think there's an understanding that she's kind of, it's hard to say, but they're kind of just writing her off. I mean,
Who's writing her?
the community. I mean, the community there in Yemen and that which is in New York now. She said in private conversations, because she was also scared that they were being taped, that she didn't want to do this, but that they threatened to kill the father. And so she's very circumspect in how she says it. She doesn't say in a private phone call, I didn't want to do this, they're going to kill me. But, there's ways to say it and ways not to say it. The very general belief is that she did it, she sacrificed herself. And the thing is with conversion, you can't convert out of Islam because you're considered an apostate. So it's apostasy to reconvert. So once you're in, you're in. So she's kind of out there, gone. She's alive, but I mean,
Are there any other places, any other countries or sections of countries in the Middle East that are in the same sort of condition as far as numbers?
there are, the ones I visited, Saudi, there are none, probably,
Right.
maybe a few. No, maybe a few quietly on the borders with Yemen or someplace else. There's supposed to be a graveyard in Saudi, I've been told, Jewish graveyard. And of course, history has shown there were always Jews over there. Morocco, there's about 5,000. Algeria, there's a smaller number. I did not go to Algeria, but I went to Morocco. Tunisia, I went to, there's about 900 on a place called Jerba, on an island. They're protected, actually, although Al-Qaeda's first terrorist act after 9/11, I believe, was launched against an ancient Al-Ghriba, the ancient Al-Ghriba synagogue on that island. I saw it. It was a beautiful synagogue. We got about 900 there and several hundred more in Tunis. They're fairly well off. They survive. Egypt is, if they have less than 50, I'd be surprised. But more than 50, I'd be surprised. Where else? Turkey, there are some. There's 25,000 in Iran, but that's a different issue.
Syria.
Iraq, there are less than I have fingers on my hand, literally. Iran, there are about 25,000. And those are,
Actually, we're going to show the film on this very issue.
Yeah, so I won't go into it
Yeah,
anymore.
we'll deal with specific.
so, yeah, it's a difficult place to live as a Jew.
Any other questions or comments? Okay, so we're going to wrap it up. We're going to take a break. The food is coming soon, and then we'll start the film in about 20 minutes.